Yes, what I did was I went to my phone because for some reason Skype was not, I couldn't hear audio on my computer.
Ah, well,
Don't know why.
let's make sure we're going through here fine. And all right, we are live. Welcome back to another very special episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels. Or is it? I don't know anymore. And actually, my guest happens to be in the city of whatever you want to call it, and that is the one and only Mr. Paul Hynek. Mr. Hynek, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's truly a pleasure to speak to you. And I know you spoke at the UFO Congress last year. I've obviously told you the story about how my name came to be shortened to accommodate your father's as an homage to him. I've been a huge believer. I'm 40 years old, going on 41. I've been a huge believer since I was age 4, if you can believe it, 1984, long before I actually saw something. And for everyone out there, in case they don't know, the whole story started as is after law school. Obviously, for those people who are not familiar with American education, to go to law school and to finish, you get a Juris Doctorate, a JD, and that is obviously a doctorate, considered obviously being a doctor if you're not going to practice law or if you use it for any other method. And so I started working with Third Phase of the Moon almost 8 years ago. Actually, was 8 years ago. And they suggested, if I'm going to be in ufology, might as well be Dr. John Elias. Because my middle name is Andy, I figured why not shorten it to Dr. J. Andy Elias as an homage to Dr. J. Allen Hynek. So everybody knows that now, and of course, so does my guest, now that we're on the same page. And I see we already got people in the chat, which is great. Let me ask you, Paul, if you don't mind me calling you that, what year were you born, if you don't mind me asking that?
1962.
Okay, so you were in the midst of Project Bluebook, literally 10 years into it.
Yeah, I mean, I was, just born, but I really think Project Bluebook couldn't have gone on without me. I mean, I was the mature guidance I was providing when I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old was just priceless, I think.
I have to say, especially at that time, we know from the UFOs going over, or UAPs, whatever people want to call them now, going over the White House or the Capitol twice, I believe it was 1952. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe you could fill us in the story, that's where your father came into play as far as Project Bluebook, where they decided to set up a public commission. Is that the case?
Yeah, so he was actually involved with 3 projects under the auspices of the U.S. Air Force. There was Project Sign and Grudge, and then Project Bluebook.
That's right. Thank you for mentioning that. Now, Sign was first, right? Sign, then Grudge, then Bluebook.
Yeah, that's right. And Sign was the most sort of open-minded to the phenomena. Grudge, aptly named, was not. And then Bluebook was really more of an elaborate PR exercise to tamp down post-war hysteria.
Now, the reason why I'm glad you brought up post-war hysteria was because of the Foo Fighters, is what people who aren't familiar with what UFOs, UAPs, whatever the people want to call them now, during World War II, a number of pilots on both sides were seeing craft, and they called them Foo Fighters because each side assumed it was the other side's weapons. Am I right?
Yeah, and my father used to say how many countless rounds of ammunition were actually fired at Venus, which was assumed to be some secret weapon from the other side, looming, appearing ominously above the horizon.
Now, this obviously, we all know, goes back much further than that, especially if people have read Chariots of the Gods or listened to Zecharia Sitchin or, of course, Eric von Däniken, who many of you heard here several times. We could see many examples, for instance, in the Bible. If you read it literally, Ezekiel, right? Ezekiel, the wheel within the wheel, the four faces, am I right?
Yeah, and I'm talking with a brilliant guy, a professor at LSU named Stephen Finley, who makes the point that the entire nation of Islam is in fact a UFO religion.
Another claim that I've heard from many people is the Fatima experience was actually also a UFO experience. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's a whole laundry list. I mean, on one hand, anything that happens in the sky that's written about in the Bible is fair game to interpret as a sort of a culturally prismed saucer or UFO encounter.
Now, saucer was coined by Kenneth Arnold going back to 1947, right before Roswell, when he said these objects seemed to be like skipping in the water. But the actual objects themselves were not saucer shaped. Am I correct?
There's a whole variety of shapes, whether they're triangles or triangle wedges, cigars, circles, squares, Victorian airships. I think there is a body of claims of sightings for crafts that are just about any shape you can imagine, as well as invisible ones.
Yes, yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that too, because the invisible factor seems to be something that we have integrated in our own technology. For instance, the president mentioned the other day the F-35 and its stealth capabilities. And I do know, going back to the B-2 stealth bomber as well as the F-117, the size of the aircraft would register on radars literally the size of a bird, so people would disregard it. Now we have FLIR and other things that are able to capture these things that are typically invisible to the naked eye, which totally expands the scope of how much we are actually being visited and observed.
Absolutely. And things like that, instrumentation like that, and radar are what really add a lot of credibility to reports. Because if you have one person, you can sort of evaluate their credibility. When you've got more than one person, especially in a different location, it's even better. And when you have some type of machine corroboration, the cases become so convincing that you really can't sweep them under the rug. So these Navy cases, the gimbal and Tic Tac are so compelling to me for that reason.
Now, the gimbal, Tic Tac, and Go Fast, those are the three that were released. And one great thing about that, this reminds me of Roswell. Obviously, I wasn't alive, neither were you, but your father was alive during the Roswell incident. I'm going to take this straight from Joe Rogan's quote. How the hell can they screw up and say there's a flying saucer recovered and the next day say it was a weather balloon? Are you telling me Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer at the only nuclear armed base in the United States, if not the world, screws up his own sighting and thinks it's a weather balloon? And how many other people decided that it was a flying saucer with bodies, which was the second sight, I believe, at Corona, and then to change the stories. That's what blows me away about this. And let's go back even a little bit, not too long ago. If you recall, every major news outlet, whether it be Republican things like the Fox Network or One American News, all the way to New York Times or CNN, Washington Post, they had the quotes, "Off-world vehicle not from this earth." You could still Google that for everybody out there today. Now, you will find out the very next day they changed it. They removed the word vehicle, and I believe they removed not from this earth, just off-world, I think materials it was. It sounds like to me somebody rushed to judgment and said, hey, let's tell the truth a little bit and see how the public reacts. And then right away they're like, no, take it back.
Yeah, I mean, you strip everything else from Roswell away. You had, like you said, the people on the base, and this is a couple years after World War II, so this is not, days of wine and roses. And they determine that they've captured a flying saucer. Now, you'd think you'd have people on the base who could make a sober distinction between tinfoil, rubber, and balsa wood and some shape-shifting alien alloy that they've never seen before. So the first they made that determination, yes, we have a flying saucer. It is not mogul balloons. It is not this. It's not that. And then they made the decision, you know what? We better tell the press about it. I mean, those two thresholds of evidence and convincing are so high for them to do that. And they did. And of course, yeah, after that, they've always been walking it back. But it's hard to walk back something that you ran to the press with in the first place.
I agree. And in order to get to the press, they have to clear it with not just the person who's reporting it, their editor, and then, of course, the editor of the paper or the news station. So there seems to be several levels. And, of course, for my contacts, people who have heard this show for almost 8 years, people from the NSA, FBI, CIA, etc., we know those intelligence agencies are usually monitoring, if not embedded in these news organizations. That way they could filter out what comes out to us.
Yeah, there's no telling how many layers of filtering there is before stuff gets to us. So the Roswell, I mean, that's the thing that just amazes me about that, is that you have these very sober individuals decide we have a flying saucer and we're telling people about it. No matter else what happens or disinformation campaigns there may be, there's just no denying that essential truth of the Roswell case.
And now, I spoke to not too long ago someone you probably know of by Mr. Paul Blake Smith. Do you know that name?
I do not.
He wrote the book on the 1941, I believe it was 41, Cape Girardeau incident, where we had another crash in Missouri that was relayed by the Reverend, I think his last name was Mand, and he relayed it to his granddaughter years later, and Stan Friedman investigated this a lot, and that's what came to be. And so that was just another one that was swept under the rug, because that Reverend came there that way he can administer last rites to the dying extraterrestrials. And he was brought by a police officer or sheriff. A sheriff knocked on the door and said, "Hey, we need you to administer last rites or dead rites to dead pilots, so on and so forth." You want to put that in quotes. To a crashed aircraft. They didn't know what kind of aircraft it was. Now, as soon as the military showed up, what's the first thing they do? Turn around, don't look, and shut up. And that's what they said.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. I'm going to veer a little bit from here. Project Bluebook itself, when it ended in 1969, I have a few copies. I believe it was Project Bluebook number 14 is the most recent, or the last one, the one that Stan Friedman was selling prior to his death. May he rest in peace. And of course, I think there's 731, correct me if I'm wrong, incidents where they cannot explain them at all. Now, the years 67, 68, and 69, they went from unexplained from hundreds or 1,000 plus incidents to 3, 2, 1, and then they shut down. Is that what you know?
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about Project Bluebook is that, it really was, as I said, more, especially after 1953, with the Robertson panel, it was more of a PR exercise. It wasn't really an honest scientific investigation. And their mandate was to explain cases, was to be a solution factory. And even with that mandate, and even with some cherry picking of which cases they would deign to involve, of the 12,000 odd cases they investigated, they still couldn't come up with explanations for over 5% of them, some 700 cases, like you said. So, and this is with, and this not with scientific panels over their shoulders saying, oh, it couldn't have been this, it couldn't have been that. That even with that, they still couldn't explain 5% of the cases that were not just any cases, but that merited some kind of study. So I find that just utterly fascinating that they tried their best and still couldn't do 5%.
Now, out of the 700 plus cases, if I'm not mistaken, 731, you do have some cases that were so-called explained because your father was forced to come up with an explanation, such as swamp gas. Really, swamp gas? I mean, these people they put their lives on the line, their reputation on the line to tell their story, have the United States Army, Air Force, and the world's top astronomer, being your father, leading those three projects, specifically Bluebook because it lasted for the longest. And, to have such explanations because it seems to me his arms were being pulled. Like, you better do this or else. And so if we remove those cases, it seems to be there would be a lot more. What do you say about that?
Absolutely. My father said he pulled a lot of chestnuts out of the fire for the Air Force. And of the ones that are officially classified as explained, I can't hazard a guess as to what percentage of those, if looked at again, if especially if they'd been looked at seriously at that point, would have also been unexplained.
I just have to do a quick shout out, of course, to a good friend and a supporter. Thank you so much for your super chat, Rockstar, and also I want to say you rock as well. And of course, everybody who has questions, please give me some time so I can get some through with Mr. Hynek here, and then of course I'll turn it all to you. Again, Rockstar, thank you so much for being here today or this evening, and also for keeping in touch with me throughout this past hard time, should we say. Now, let me ask you this, Mr. Hynek. I heard, and again, I can't verify this, maybe you can, because obviously, he was your father every time he would come home. I'm wondering if he spoke to you or he was actually being a true patriot and wouldn't speak about the secret. Is it true that the best cases were withheld from him, or is that something we can never verify?
Yeah, so he would talk freely with us. And yes, many cases were withheld from Project Bluebook altogether and were investigated by the likes of the Air Intelligence Service Squadron. So Project Bluebook was not given all of the cases that the Air Force found the most interesting. And yeah, clearly they did keep things from my father. They weren't looking for him to apply his astrophysics chops to all the hardest cases. They just wanted cases that sort of touched the nerve of the public to be explained away.
Now, let's just assume that he wasn't forced to explain those cases away. And let's assume they were being fully honest with him and showed him the cases that had a lot of potential. What do you think the actual number of cases would have been? Is that something he would have told you when he came home at night?
No, it's very hard it's almost like proving a negative. It's very hard to know what that would have been. Double, triple, that I just don't know.
There is another shout out I want to give real quick. Anybody who gives a super chat, I do want to thank in the middle. So forgive me, Mr. Hynek, for that. Pyramid 7, thank you so much. I'm very glad that you're here, and hello to you as well as everybody else. Now, I do know Dr. J. Allen Hynek, your father, after he left Project Bluebook, or maybe you can confirm this for me, maybe even before he left Project Bluebook or when it was closed down, he became a believer, an actual believer, a proponent for UFOs visiting us. How did that come about? Did he start as a skeptic? Did he truly start as saying, nah, these people are seeing things, or they're seeing, meteors or whatever it be, to actually realizing, wait a minute, these people cannot all be crazy. Obviously, there are some crazy people. Oh, the ETs visited me and they told me that we have to clean the oceans or things like that. But there seems to be that there were so many people that were actually credible in that era that somehow, over a period of time, your father ended up becoming a full-on proponent for this. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I would say proponent is better than believer. I don't think scientists traffic much with the word belief. At the beginning, yes, he did not think there was anything to the phenomena. And over time, before he left Bluebook, he became convinced by virtue of the accumulated weight of the evidence that this was definitely a legitimate phenomena, and that required that deserved honest, rigorous scientific study.
Now, I'm going to break from my questions for a brief moment, and then I will come back to my own just to ask some of the questions that I see in the chat. I see Goof on. Rich, thank you so much for joining this live stream. Here's his question. Here it goes. Did his father ever talk about the men in black following him or following the family?
There's an account of seeing actually men in black in a white sedan. And he did see men in black, and he did go on investigations where people, I don't know if they used the term men in black, but talked about how they'd already been visited and they didn't want to talk anymore. I don't know of anybody following our family, but yeah, he the men in black were very much a real phenomenon to him.
This other question comes, here we go. Lasha Senya, did your father ever seem frightened about anything?
My father was frightened about my ability to get a job, having been a French major undergraduate. Apart from that, I never saw him afraid of anything. He was more, I would say, fascinated by the fact that he was studying one of the most important questions in history, and trying to get closer and closer to maybe not the answer, but one of the answers.
Here's a question that I have that was from earlier, and I know you're a consultant for History Channel's Project Bluebook. Now, did you think that was a good portrayal of what actually happened? Because in my eyes, it seemed to me that History Channel was kind of making your father not look as bright as he was. I mean, for crying out loud, he was the astronomer the Air Force picked. Why would they make him seem... I mean, I only saw the first season, and I got a little upset about that because it didn't seem very historical. For instance, the Mothman Incident, right? They say that Dr. J. Allen Hynek confused it for an owl. I mean, what's your take on that?
So there's a lot there, yes. And my brother and I were consultants on the show. The show had a very interesting premise in that it was, especially the first season, based on actual reports. Doesn't mean that they actually happened, but actual reports. And then it added sort of a layer of dramatization on top of that. The show didn't set out to be 100% accurate, but more so to be authentic. And by that, I mean that you had the characters of my father and my mother being portrayed in a respectful way, showing them as confronting this phenomena, and then the actors, who are fantastic, trying to get a sense of how my parents would have reacted in stretched circumstances. So I was happy with the show. The broad strokes are pretty much what happened, and the details are very much different. And I thought they portrayed my father, to your point, just fine. Some things he doesn't know, and he makes things up, and other times, as they do in Hollywood, you have a scientist, and the tendency is to make him seem like Spock or a robot and using logic all the time, or having scientific knowledge about all manner of other things like deep ocean currents and flowers and plants in Kentucky. So it's kind of a mixed bag of how they present him. The show needed him to not understand the phenomena, because then there's no point in going on if he understands it right away. But also to kind of get swept up in it. So my family was happy with the show. I think my father would have thought it was just a rollicking good yarn. And I think my mom would have said, oh, it's a bunch of nonsense. You don't need me in there.
Whoa. Okay, so she wasn't necessarily a believer.
No, I wouldn't say a believer. But like my father, she accepted that there's a phenomena, She was just very modest and humble, and wouldn't have seen the need for her to appear in a TV show or her character.
I see, gotcha. Now, because in season one, like I said, I didn't see the following seasons. Did it go through season three or did it end on season two?
2 seasons.
2 seasons. Okay. And now it showed one of your father's sons. I'm assuming one of your older brothers, right? Because you weren't alive in the era of Mothman, etc. During the early cases. Am I right?
There's the child is named Joel, and I have a brother named Joel who, like I said, was a consultant on the show. But that character was just sort of a central casting Hollywood child who had really nothing to do with any of us.
Now, again, I got some more questions which are coming in. You're a very popular person, which, of course, I've been trying to seek you out for a while, which I'm glad we finally made today happen. So let me get to these people questions again before I get to mine so I catch up. This goes back to that guy. That's a username. Are aliens truly hostile as Hollywood portrays?
What a great question. So I just wrote what do you call it? The back cover blurb for Chris Campobasso's upcoming book, which is basically, I think the name may change, but it's basically the encyclopedia of the 82 reported alien species. So my feeling is, we could talk about this at length as to how extraterrestrials would learn about us and get here and why they would care and what they would do. My belief, and this is just my personal belief, is that if we had aliens coming here that were truly hostile in intent, and hostility could be more sort of the passive aggressive end of the spectrum where they're doing interbreeding and experimenting and whatnot, but I don't really regard that as hostile. Hostile, I think, more sort of like War of the Worlds and things where they're just coming to take over or take all our resources, etc. If there was an extraterrestrial species or multiple extraterrestrial species who are coming here with truly hostile intent, we would know it. So take, for example, you see you're in a park and you see two dogs interacting. Mm-hmm. If you have to ask, are they playing? Are they fighting? Then clearly they are playing. When two dogs are fighting, nobody ever says, are they fighting? It's obvious. And so I think it's the same thing with an alien species. If they came here with hostility on the agenda, we would know it immediately because their technology would be so far superior to ours, there'd be nothing that we could do, and they would just exert their will over us immediately.
You're absolutely right. And I'm thinking something along the lines of if they didn't want to destroy, say, other species or blow up the planet or make it uninhabitable, possibly something like the bubonic plague or some other bioweapon that they could have unleashed on us. You're absolutely right. We have nothing against them. If they're using what seems to be what Bob Lazar said, and for those people who are still on the fence about him, I've always been a big believer of him. For several reasons. One of the reasons that Stanton Friedman did always disregarded him was the fact that he said, well, he couldn't find records for MIT and Caltech, and at the same time that he did poorly in high school and went to junior college. Well, guess what, folks? I didn't do very good in high school. Why? Because I didn't care. I also went to Pierce College as well as COC, College of the Canyons. It wasn't until I got to UCSB when I really started taking school really seriously and did very well and then went off to law school. So that argument that I've always had with Stanton Friedman fell on its face. And the other part is a lot of things that Bob said have seemed to come through, like Element 115. Another, Jeremy Corbell, actually interviewed one of his classmates. I believe it was Caltech or MIT. There's just like, I think, 6 or 7 things that have happened in the last 32, 31 years. And also, this is the biggest thing. The guy's never changed his story. And another thing, taken straight from Bob Lazar's mouth. Wouldn't he have come up with a better lie than that?
I don't know. I don't. I don't know what to think about Bob Lazar. I've never met him. I know his story. Um, Element 115 isn't all that convincing to me, as it has such a short half-life,
Oh yeah.
and its usability is a question. Now, again, if we're evaluating what aliens may be using for technology, we can't really do it through the lens of what we know to be possible, right? So I don't know. I mean, Bob's it's a fascinating. He's a fascinating story that he portrays, and I don't know if it's true or not.
Okay, let me backtrack here. Let's see what else I have. I don't want to miss these ones. Okay, 1028 Productions. How far off was the series on TV from the real history? What was embellished and what wasn't? And that's from Doc Skinner. Doc Skinner, shout out to you, dear friend.
Uh, 1028 Productions. I'm not sure what that is.
Oh no, that's the username.
Oh, right. Okay. So asking about the Project Bluebook TV show?
Yeah, how far off was it from actual history?
Well, so a lot of the things were true, well, were reported in terms of individual cases. And then there's a layer of like visualizing things that were reported. And then there are things that are just made up. As far as, my father knew Werner von Braun, but as far as I know, didn't see him. It wasn't, in presence of a teleporting spaceship or interdimensional traveling ship. And there's a lot of things in there are dramatized. How much of it, it's hard to make a percentage, but quite a bit was added to sort of tie things together. Because one of the things about UFOs, as I think the listeners know, it's like, you used to see on those TV shows, the guy that would run around spinning plates on these poles and just keep going between them and like spinning them all. And they weren't really connected. And it's kind of the same thing with UFOs. You have all these things spinning and we don't know how they're connected. And so one of the things about the show, which is trying to portray a kind of cohesive universal worldview, is to make that narrative connective thread between these. And that's that kind of that layer of dramatization that, was not true based on reports, could be true or could have some elements of truth behind it. We don't know. But, the creator of the show, the producer, the network executive, and the actors were all, I wouldn't say big fans, but we're all fascinated by UFOs and wanted to portray it in a way that, not only would attract people who are already sort of drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, but they would bring in other people. Sort of like the movie Close Encounters. These works of fiction do a great deal to broaden the tent, to allow more people to come in there. Because there's not a lot of people who don't accept UFOs and then read a book or watch a documentary that say, oh, you know what, I'm gonna accept UFOs now. A lot of times that happens with a work of fiction where they don't have their sort of defensive mechanisms up and just see something and say, wow, that's interesting. I want to learn more. So the show has quite a lot that was not reported, some of which may have been true, but the dramatic purpose of that was to tie these things all together to have, like I said, this sort of overall cohesive universe.
Let me throw in my question before I get back to everyone in the chat. And anyone whose question I missed and is way far up and I can't go back, please copy and paste it, but put it in caps. That way I know it's a question, not a comment. And believe me, I am paying attention to the chat room. Okay, now, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the movie. I heard the ending where your father was in was actually based on a landing, if I'm not mistaken, at Homestead Air Force Base. Have you heard about that theory?
Yeah, I've heard that. I don't know about that. I did meet Spielberg during filming, And one of the original endings had my father, everybody else runs away, and it's just my father interacting with the aliens. And like they take his glasses and they're playing with them in his pipe. That didn't play well. I've heard rumors about that before, and that, this was a message being sent. I've not seen anything convincing to make me believe that. So I just don't know.
This is back to the chat. Lasha's question: what does he think about the fact that the Soviet Union had a similar program called Project Blue File? Did his father ever say that the U.S. and Soviet Union were doing a coordinated effort?
What a cool question. I never heard him say anything about the U.S. and the Soviet Union working in concert. So, yeah, I really don't know. But, if one of these governments, let's say that the U.S. government captured saucers or inhabitants of saucers, and like in a Bob Lazar approach, they're trying to reverse engineer the propulsion systems. Now, if that's the case, you'd think that they're not going to share that with anybody. Well, what if through clandestine channels they hear that the Soviets also have something? That might get them to talk. There's just so many angles here, and I can spin 3 or 4 scenarios in which various governments would talk to each other.
Now, I do know, and again, this is conjecture, this came from Bob Lazar's mouth, that at a period of time while he was working at S4 near Area 51, for those, I'm sure if anybody who's here right now in the chat or listening to this now or down the line, obviously you know what Area 51 is, and then you probably know what S4 is. Bob Lazar is the first and only person that I know of that talked about that there would be routinely Russians. As a matter of fact, he used the word commies because his lab partner, Barry, would say, oh, the commies are here, things like that. And I thought that was kind of strange because we're in the midst of a Cold War in the 80s. We're talking, they're sharing things like EMP. Why would they be showing the sports model and 8 other craft? Again, if this was the case, unless, of course, there was disinformation. So that's the only time I've ever heard it. And that was recently, too, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't presume to know where the disinformation starts and stops.
Yeah, and then that's a scary thing because now with the technology and information flowing so easily and so fast, I mean, something can happen, for instance, in Kuwait, and in 2 seconds, it's all over Facebook, Instagram, Minds, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. The world spread so fast, and the telephone game back when you remember it as I remember it when we were youngsters. We'd all sit in a circle. One person would say something. By the time it got to the last person, each person whispering it, the message would change. So through social media, how many times do we have things like this happen? I would think far more than, say, 40 years ago.
Yeah, like you said, if something happens, it can be around the world in seconds. It could travel faster around the world than a interstellar spaceship. It's fascinating. Now we've got the UFO phenomenon has not gone away. There's a continuing drumbeat of cases around the world, and it's hard to. We've got more and more people seeing things. And one of the interesting things about now is that there's much less stigma about it. 30, 40 years ago, if someone wanted to go public with having seen a UFO, they could be ostracized. They could lose their job. They could be ridiculed in society. And now it just doesn't seem like that at all, that people aren't afraid to come and see things. And that's one of the things that a show like Project Bluebook or other things on TV and movies can help, is to make people feel comfortable in saying that they've seen this. They've had like one of these traumatic experiences.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I believe the most recent poll was 68% of the population believes that we are not alone. Now, I don't know how many of that percentage believes and knows that we have been visited, but we have far surpassed the more than half number, which things have changed dramatically, which is a good thing for us because I know we've been called lots of names, crazy. For instance, I was always the black sheep in the family until, my other family members started to see things and see videos that were very credible, such as what Captain David Fravor caught, and the other two, the Go Fast and the Gimbal. Just there's so many amazing good footage. But then here's the problem: our technology is so good. We also have to worry about how many fakes are out there. But here's the question: if there are fakes, that we know there are a lot of fakes on YouTube, etc. Well, if no one's taking the credit for it and it's not being monetized, then why would someone put out a fake?
Okay, so here's what I say to that. For a couple reasons. Notoriety. It doesn't take much to motivate someone to do something. And I've met people who've done hoaxes of different kinds, whether it's crop circles or things. People get a kick out of seeing that something that they've fabricated out of whole cloth sort of touches a nerve somewhere, even if they don't have any, at least direct monetary reward for it. But the other thing is, I had a partner in business, and there was a guy that said he was going to invest in our company. And I found out that this guy had in the past forged a letter from a federal judge. And my partner was saying, oh, well, why would he do that? And my point was, look, how, the world is complex. I have a hard time understanding why I do things. It's impossible to know why people do strange things. People have all kinds of motivations, but clearly there are lots and lots of fake things out there. And I think people sometimes just like having that 15 minutes of YouTube fame. I think it can be as simple as that.
Yeah, and there seems to be a lot more fakes than actual real videos. But thankfully, there are some good, credible videos that seem to be popping up more so now. I don't know why. It seems like we're going through a global wave now more than, I don't know, the Hudson Valley wave or the golden era of the 50s. What do you think's the reason behind this? Because from what I understand, after World War II, after we dropped the nukes in Japan, they started coming here because it's essentially what Stan Friedman's words were, it's like the children found the matches. We better watch them. I'm wondering now, is it because of the discourse from what's happening on the Hill? There are certain words that I told you I can't use, which is otherwise I have to be more specific, or something else that's affecting us all around the earth, which I'll just say the C word, if you know what I mean. Do you think that is what's causing them, or is it just, hey, let's check on them where they are now?
Yeah, so let me mention again, or say one more aspect about like why people would post bogus things. It also could be part of an overall government disinformation campaign. One of the quotes about the devil is the most effective thing the devil ever did was to make people not believe in him. So if you're the government and the Air Force doesn't want people to be concerned that the Air Force cannot protect us from any kind of threat that comes from the sky, well, make the phenomena seem ridiculous. So, post or pay people to post a bunch of goofy, wacky videos. That will help. As for what's happening now and why there are more, there's always been, since Kenneth Arnold, as you mentioned, there's always been lots of UFO cases, and they're not dying down. They're not going away. And the recent Navy disclosures are some of the best, if not, the Nimitz case. And I'm personal friends with Kevin Day, who was the radar operator on the Princeton, the first to spot them. It's about the best case I can ever imagine. You've got radar corroboration, you've got gun camera footage, people on deck looking through binoculars, you've got the Navy and the Pentagon, confirming that the videos are legitimate. You can't find. I think my father would just be flabbergasted by that case.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And, those were very, very different times. If your father was alive today and saw what was happening with the government coming out and releasing these videos, which some of them are old, 2004, they waited 16 years, or actually, no, I think they were released in December 2017 by To the Stars Academy. 13 years. Why would they be sitting on footage for that long when they could have released it earlier? Now, I know he hasn't been on the show yet, but speaking with Lou Elizondo and other members of the To the Stars Academy, which I know you work with. You work with Chris Mellon, right?
Yes.
I do know that they were frustrated, which is why Lou Elizondo, the point man for ET or the UFOs program, ATIP, OSAP, whatever the new term is these days, came forward and said they're not doing enough, or they just got frustrated. How would your father feel now with this huge influx? Technology that we have that would have been so unfathomable in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even 80s. To what we are using now, it's almost ET-like, alien-like. The last 120 years, we have jumped so far as technology that it blows me away. I'll give you an example. If you go from 900 AD to 1900 AD, well, how much difference did you really have? Okay, well, we had gunpowder going back to China. You had the printing press. But for the most part, you didn't really have that much change. Now, you go from 1890 to 1990, or let's just say 1890 to, say, 2020. The amount of changes is so high, it begs the question, have we reverse engineered technology?
Okay, there's a lot there. I think my father would be fascinated by what's going on now, especially with the government and disclosures. Have we captured saucers and reverse engineered propulsion systems? I have a hard time believing that we have, for a couple reasons. One is secrets like that are very hard to keep. Now, yes, we have people like Bob Lazar and others, but there's not that many people that have come forward with very credible stories. And secrets like that are just very, very hard to keep. Plus, if we had reverse engineered something, now of course, there's a possibility that we have crafts and have not been able to sort of crack the code. But if we had, you'd have to think that if there was our military that did that, they would start exerting superiority. Because the two areas in technology where if you get a qualitative, meaningful advantage over your enemies, you basically rule the world, are artificial intelligence and UFO technology. And if our military or the Russians or the Chinese or whoever had been successful in a 30-year effort to figure out the propulsion system of UFOs, I think we would know it by now, because I think they would want to demonstrate that superiority.
One thing I have heard is from, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson said this, and other members in the intelligence agencies. A friend of mine, Mike Baker, former CIA, I think he was a station chief, I don't recall where. He now is out of the CIA, owns one of the largest PMCs, private military contracting companies in the world. He said, if that was the case, that we were holding the secret, how can we keep secrets so long? Now, when I
Yeah.
turn around that, my argument is, well, what about the Manhattan Project? His argument comes back to me and says that was only for a few years. So,
Well,
go on.
right. That was for a few years. And this is what, 30, 40, 50 years, depending on which case you think things may have originated from.
Exactly, exactly. And we're going
And
on
arguably even a bigger secret.
73 years from Roswell, 68 years from the flights over the Capitol. That's a long time.
Yeah. I just, it's hard to see how a secret like that would be kept, because I can talk a lot about, Air Force people, taking secrets to their graves because they swore to do so. But at some point, some more people than I think have come forward so far would have come forward and said, look, loyalty oath be damned. This is a matter of, international safety and advancement, and I need to speak out. So at least I'll say I haven't seen enough evidence from people that say they've been involved with these things to convince me that they have. Certainly could be, and there certainly could be secrets kept, but I just haven't seen enough to convince me that it has happened. I won't rule out, but I can't say that I do think it has happened, because I haven't seen enough evidence for that.
Here's a question. I'm going to go in reverse order. This is a recent question. Then I'll go back to the older ones that I missed. This is from Rockstar, and I do want to thank you again, Rockstar, for your super chat. Here comes a question. What is the most convincing UFO proof known at this time, in your opinion, of course?
Well, a good question. I would say the Navy case, the Nimitz, the Tic Tac case, to me is the gold standard, because of it wasn't one sighting; it was over a week.
2 weeks, I believe. 2 weeks, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the number of people involved, the different types of corroboration, and Navy aviators and personnel are about the most credible witnesses you can have, and also, since I know one of them, I've talked with him at length, and I can judge his sincerity. I just can't think of a better case than these. So to me, they're, sort of the suite of the three of them are really the gold standard for evidentiary-based UFO analysis.
One of the great things that, speaking of the gold standard of the three cases, the Nimitz, which is the Tic Tac, and the Go Fast, and the gimbal, specifically the gimbal. Here's a couple more things that why I always believe Bob Lazar. 2015, when I had a chance to see him, one of the questions that was asked was, is there any UFO video that you've seen anywhere that is exactly identifiable to what you worked on, the sports model? He goes, I'll tell you something. He goes, if anyone's ever seen that guy Billy Myers footage of that one that looks like the sports model, he said either he was in on this hoax and knew exactly what was going on with this classified base, or he was telling the truth. And then he not whispered, but he goes, I think he was telling the truth. I think that's one of the greater things that gives it credit. Another thing, too, it was an episode of Ancient Aliens on Element 115, where they brought an aerospace engineer whose name eludes me right now. You might recall after I mentioned this. And when they were observing the gimbal craft, the gimbal evidence, the footage, as it's rotating, and even before it's rotating, what you see behind it is like a light emanating or surrounding it. And this astrophysicist, and he's not an astronaut, astrophysicist who works in the aerospace field, said that it was an Alcubierre warp bubble. Essentially, what would be needed, it's a theory that it gives us an opportunity to jump dimensions, to go faster than light travel. And I think that's one of the most convincing things. As a matter of fact, while I was watching that episode, because that aerospace engineer who works for NASA and other corporations involving things that are building products for NASA, he was definitely a skeptic. You could see in his eyes the moment when he realized that that's what it was, that it wasn't an artifact from the camera. And again, that's just one more element of the bubble that to me, I was like, whoa, okay. This case is really phenomenal. And like you said, the gold standard. These were released by the military, the Pentagon. They didn't retract it the next day. It didn't come back the next day and say, oh, it was a weather balloon. Another thing, too. What about the fact that there is no sonic booms when these craft, I believe the Tic
Right.
Tac was clocked at almost 27,000 miles per hour? I'm sorry, but there's nothing here using conventional technology that would travel that fast and not create a sonic boom.
Well, yeah, and that gets us back to, if a civilization, and we're talking now about extraterrestrial as opposed to other, perhaps even more exotic provenances, but if an extraterrestrial civilization has come here, in my mind, they would have already gone through a singularity in which artificial intelligence has become self-aware, and the things that they could do would appear to be magic to us. They would be able to manipulate time and space and energy and matter and do whatever they want. So whether there's, to me, the issue of going faster than the speed of sound, Mach, and not having a sonic boom would be a trivial thing for them. You look at some of the theories of propulsion systems of anti-gravity and manipulating universons that Claude Poher and others talk about. There's all manner of things that could create these types of effects without the sort of symptomatic sort of announcements like sonic booms that we're used to. So if they're coming here, they've got technology so far beyond ours that we have no idea as to how to evaluate what should or should not happen.
You're absolutely right, especially going back 100 years ago when our science was literally, steam engines and what we're still using to this day, internal combustion engines. It is magic. The thought of a computer or a smartphone, just like Elon Musk says, an iPhone is basically AI. You could talk to it, it talks back to you. It tells you which way the wind blows. It gives you directions. All sorts of stuff. And then I'm sure you heard about Neuralink, right? Where they take a little piece out of your skull, implant a chip to it. I think it's linked with Bluetooth. It increases your ability for intelligence. It increases a lot. It gives you basically superhuman. I don't want to say superhuman strength, but abilities that normally people wouldn't have. That to me is kind of scary. I don't know if I want Big Brother in my head, but at the same time, that just goes to show how far we as a civilization have come. Now, were we helped or did we come upon it ourselves? I don't know. I'm questioning either way. I'm starting to believe that maybe Philip Corso was right when he did say that he worked for the Foreign Technology Division in the Pentagon and had actual alien artifacts and brought them to Bell Laboratories and other companies at the time, and an unlimited budget, and patented these items and created things such as Kevlar, such as night vision. Again, I've heard Robert Schaefer is another good friend of mine. I know you're in Mensa, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah, so you know Robert Schaefer, he speaks there as well a lot, and we're all in L.A. County at some sort. He's close, I believe he's a little further east than us, and of course the same thing too is he gives the other argument. He doesn't believe lasers were created by ETs. Actually, he doesn't believe anything was created by ETs because he doesn't believe when they visited. But, but the argument can be made either way. But it's so convincing that we've had such a technological leap. It's so mind-blowing. That's why I think we're living in the most exciting times.
Yeah, we've passed the point, and I'm I'm a big futurist into life extension and artificial intelligence and all these, cool toys and bells and whistles. And I don't know how many times it's happened now where I've read an article or seen a video of something so mind blowing, I have to think, is that really real? Is that happening? And it's a very sober article talking about some new innovation. Things are happening now. I mean, you look at you may have seen these articles that compare the state of our science and technology with that of Star Trek. And in a lot of ways, we're past Star Trek, like the tricorder and things like that. So these are extremely interesting times. If you had asked our great-great-grandfathers, if they had sat down and you'd said to them, hey, your great-great-great-grandchildren will live in a day and era when they can fly around the world, they can have breakfast in Paris and lunch or dinner in Tegucigalpa. Dentistry will be largely pain-free. We will have electricity that powers devices and things all around the world, yada, yada, yada. And you could have free video conferencing. You have to explain the word video around the world. They say, wow, that's great. Sign us up. And at the same time, there would be bombs, the magnitude of which you cannot comprehend, pointed at all the major cities 24 hours a day. We would have, the Earth could be explained, have some type of crises. Would you accept that kind of Faustian bargain? And we're now at a time, clearly, when there's a lot of perils to the Earth, and yet the upside is so fantastic of things that could happen with life extension and better distribution of economic resources throughout the world, that it is an amazingly exciting time.
It really is. It really is. And I'm very excited to see what's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years. I have a little 4-year-old goddaughter, and of course, her being born not that long ago, her lifetime, I truly think she's going to see a whole lot. And, you have other people who I still question, people such as Corey Good or Andrew Basciago, who I found a lot of holes in the story, and I can't say I believe them yet. But let's just say for a second, what if they're telling the truth? What if there are bases on the moon? What if the 10-second and Mars? What if the 10 seconds that were missing from the Apollo 11 transmissions actually were about what they were seeing, that they were being observed by craft in a crater? That begs the question that, hold on a second, they've been hiding this stuff from the very beginning. And, like I said, we're in for big surprises. And I've always believed this. We're going through a soft disclosure. That's why they keep giving us drip by drip by drip this material. And that's why, going back to the off-world vehicle, not from this Earth, came and then was, discarded the next day with a few words removed. It's almost like they wanted to test the waters again. But I don't think we're going to act like the H.G. Wells broadcast, or Orson Welles broadcast, of War of the Worlds, where people were panicking in the streets. I don't think we're going to act that way anymore. Or the Battle of L.A., where we were just shooting nonstop right. at craft, 1,400, 1,200 or 1,400 plus shells fired, and the crafts weren't, even damaged yet. I think it was 6 people died of falling debris and heart attacks, etc. here on the ground. Very, very crazy times. Anyhow, let me go back to these questions that I missed from the past that I promised these people I'd ask. This is Lasha's question. Did his father, or does he ever consider that the aliens were from another dimension and not from a physical world?
Talk about your rabbit hole. Yes, indeed. And I think you may have surmised this with me in previous comments talking about, well, now we're talking about extraterrestrial. Absolutely. My father and Jacques Vallée and others, and I'm sure listeners and you, Dr. J, have certainly considered non-extraterrestrial hypotheses, such as, in this question, interdimensional. My father called his first book on this subject, The UFO Experience, And we use the term experiencers because sighting doesn't encompass the totality of what people report. There's often communication before, during, and after. And indeed, when you talk to someone who's gone through one of these incidents, the actual sighting of the craft is really not often the thing that stands out the most. So Jacques Vallée has said, if when all is said and done, the complete explanation for UFOs is only extraterrestrial, he'd be disappointed. Because there are things that just sort of go past that. Let's skip over the challenges that the extraterrestrial hypothesis has. There are non-trivial problems in thinking that spaceships come from other planets. Let's skip right past that. My father and Jacques Vallée and others clearly thought that the extraterrestrial hypothesis was wanting in explaining the totality of the experience, and that, yes, an interdimensional theory could well be at least part of the explanation. For me, I'm fascinated by that for a variety of reasons. First of all, extraterrestrials, how would they know about us? If you represent the size of the known universe as like the continental United States, Earth would be smaller than the most tiny speck of sand or dirt in Kansas somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's a non-trivial thing for them to actually find it. Yes, we've been beaming out episodes of I Love Lucy for decades, but still space is just so vast that the actual act of finding us is extraordinarily difficult, no matter how the universe is teeming with life. Then, why would they care? I just don't understand. If they've come all this way, why would they care? You and I could get on a plane tonight and fly, to Swaziland and go 8 hours outside the capital and find a termite hill. But we don't. There's just not a compelling reason to do so. Now, interdimensional, plus these crafts seem to jump around like Cheshire cats, and they don't seem to always obey laws of physics. Okay, interdimensional, well, that would answer several of these questions. Why? How would they know about us? Well, they're maybe us, asterisk, or they're adjacent to us. So that's how they would know about us. Why would they care? Well, we're neighbors, and maybe more than neighbors. So to me, that explains two of the biggest questions of all. And for me, I'm most fascinated by the interdimensional hypothesis, and I've actually started doing research along those lines personally.
The Rendlesham case, to me, it sounded like it's not extraterrestrials, but possibly time travelers. And if you look at ancient hominids and the progression of Neanderthal, Homo erectus, to Homo sapien, and everything in between and before, what would be the next logical step? Well, we'd have a bigger head for a bigger brain. We'd use more intelligence, right? We'd have a smaller body because we wouldn't need to use our muscles for so much if technology would be using all that. And what if we didn't even have to use our vocal cords because we were, unlocking our full brain abilities to have telepathy? And then also you have Jim Penniston, who had the binary code written in, I believe it was December 1980, when the Rendlesham case happened. And it wasn't until 35 or 30 some years later when I believe it was John Burroughs came over to his house and they were discussing the Rendlesham case. And Penniston pulled out the notebook and showed him, the zeros and ones that he said that after he touched the craft, he couldn't get these images out of his head until he wrote them down. And John Burroughs said, that's binary. And they brought it to a computer technician, and the technician actually translated and said, nobody can write binary who doesn't know what they're doing. And even if they didn't have, especially in 1980, 81, who would think to write an entire message in binary? Exploration of Earth continuous, and talking about different places that are important for them to visit. It begs the question, are these non-terrestrials actually terrestrials from the future?
Yeah, and Michael Masters has written and spoken extensively about this. And to me, again, that answers the question of how would they know about us and why would they care, which are two of the biggest enigmatic questions in this whole conundrum-rich field.
Okay, let me go back to some of these before they disappear here. We asked that question about the ultra dimensional, interdimensional. Okay, Aaron's Energy 313. Can you ask him what are some of the events that changed his dad's mind from being a skeptic to realizing UFOs deserve further research?
Yeah, great question. A lot of people point to the Lonnie Zamora case in Socorro, New Mexico. But I think it's really a matter of just the straw that broke the camel's back. I think for a scientist, you don't really want to place too much stock on any one case. So, for example, the Pascagoula case in 1973 with Charlie Hickson and Calvin Parker.
Yes, I interviewed Mr. Parker. That's right.
Yeah,
Great case, by the way.
Calvin's now a good friend of mine. And I find him to be as credible as any witness I've ever met. He's a great guy. My father investigated that case thoroughly. There's actually some interesting aspects about that. But he was asked, hey, did that case happen? And his answer was, how the hell should I know? I wasn't there. But I tell you, I believe that Calvin and Charlie believe it happened. Right? That's how a scientist approaches something. So also, any one case isn't enough to make someone say, and again, I'm avoiding the word belief, but to accept a phenomena as legitimate. It really has to be a mounting body of evidence with commonality and that you can cross-analyze that make you believe that. So I don't like to look at any one case, more so just the accumulated weight of the evidence over the years just gets to be too much that an open-minded, honest scientist can no longer dismiss.
This piggybacks off of what we're talking about with interdimensional in some way. This is from Dark Hour Paranormal. Are all species of ETs that have visited us high consciousness beings?
Wow. Well, that begs the question, have ETs visited us? If they have, I'm not sure exactly what high consciousness means. It sounds pretty cool. But you'd have to think that anybody who's come here, and I'm happy to talk more about interdimensional, but anybody who's come here from away, let's say, as they say in Maine, has to have a fairly evolved level of consciousness. I can't imagine that, just the ability to hold in your brain the idea that you are going to another planet or another dimension, you're at a level well beyond what we have.
Let's see what else I got here. Okay. What is the most convincing UFO proof known at this time?
Well, I don't want to go against what I just said, but in terms of cases, I'll go back to these Navy cases.
The gold standard. Yeah.
It just got so many. It's got credible witnesses. It's got government, stamp of legitimacy, machine corroboration, multiple sightings. I just don't see any case that's stronger than that, to my mind.
Okay, let me see if I've almost caught up here. Okay, we are caught up. Now, have you yourself seen any UAPs?
I would say I've not seen any UAPs, but I may have been in contact with an associated intelligence.
Ooh, can you tell us more about that?
Sure, sure. So this goes back to interdimensional. Um, I was having lunch with my friend Nova Spivak, who's a fascinating guy who, put tardigrades on the moon. Um, and he knew about my father, and he asked me, "Hey, where did your dad think UFOs came from?" And I said, "Well, extraterrestrial doesn't seem to work for all of it. So I don't know, perhaps interdimensional." He said, "You should read a book called Alien Information Theory." Alien Information Theory by a guy named Andrew Gallimore.
Interesting.
Now, I don't know if I've ever heard of a sexier book title than Alien Information Theory. So I read it. And the book is about DMT. Are you familiar with DMT?
Yes, yes. It's well, some people use it as an artificial drug, but it's also something that's created naturally in our brains, right? That some people say that upon death, that causes the hallucinations and other things like that. Or if you're not near death, it's like dopamine. Am I right?
Exactly right. It's the most powerful psychedelic known to man, and it's coursing through the natural kingdom in plants. And yes, our pineal gland secretes it. So it's a fascinating thing that is also called the spirit molecule, which is the name of a book by Rick Strassman. So my friend said, "You should read Alien Information Theory." So I did. And it makes the case that the growing body of user reports of people who take DMT may actually be real, or some of them may be real, as opposed to just hallucinations that you're seeing because of a psychedelic drug. And so, in the interest of science, Dr. J, I decided I should start taking DMT and see what the fuss is about. And so I have been. And in my first session, I had it was incredible. It was an unbelievable experience that felt hyper real to me. That it felt that what I was experiencing was more real than what we encounter every day. That's a little bit hard to explain, but that's the feeling I had. Now, of course, this could well be all made up hallucinations, right? Obviously, I can't say that it was real. It certainly felt real. And when I was in this sort of DMT verse, as others had reported, I felt that I was in the presence of the universe being created, the fabric of the universe being made, and that there was this super intelligent alien intelligence permeating all around me. And after I kind of got my bearings, I said, "Are you what we perceive to be UFOs and aliens?" And an answer came to me, and the answer was, "We can't explain in a way that you would understand." And then whoosh, I'm back, because it's a very short trip. It's like 12, 15 minutes. And I remember thinking, well, I understand no. So it sounds like there's some yes involved in that. And I've had subsequent experiences, and it's like this continuation. I feel like it's the same intelligence that I encountered before. And so it's utterly fascinating to me. And I think there is a real legitimate scientific interest in this. But for the life of me, I don't know how I or anybody else could prove that, right? Like in like a laboratory dish, right? It's just so far beyond us. But it's something that I want to continue to explore, because it just seems to be consistent with some of the more gnarly aspects of the phenomena, and yet it could explain these things that we seem to feel to be so otherworldly, and yet could be done with the aid of a substance that, like you said, is already in us right now.
Here's another thing for you, another question for you. This is from Rockstar. Could AI be the unseen attack from ET?
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot to that. Okay, so let's go with extraterrestrial. So one, possibility that I entertain is that if extraterrestrials are sending, call them spaceships here, then you have to wonder, are there biological pilots in these ships, or are they synthetic intelligences? Now,
I'm so glad you brought that up. Let me tell you why.
sure.
Because every time in the past I heard the term glorified robots or things like that, only now have people like Kathleen Martin say the smaller grays are the AI. And I think that's such a great question and such a great answer that you're giving because it ties the two together.
Yeah, and I have great respect for Kathleen. And certainly the body of reports of Greys don't seem to suggest a lot of individualized intelligence. More sort of Borg-like, if you want to look at it through the Star Trek prism. But if these ships are coming from light years away, it may well take, unless they're going through a wormhole or teleporting or something, it may well take them a long time. And so, again, is it biological or synthetic? And maybe the Greys are the synthetic beings that their circuits go to rest for 3,000 years and then wake up. So if ships are coming from other planets, they may well be both the ship and the inhabitants completely synthetic AI manifestation.
Now, I'm going to bypass this and go to another topic now. Were you privately ever tapped to be in one of the new UFO programs that followed Project Bluebook, such as ATIP or OSAP?
No.
But obviously, we both know people who were involved, like Lou Elsonato.
Yes, that's right.
Now, Singularity, the AI singularity, the artificial intelligence singularity, is supposed to happen, I think, based in mathematics in the next 20 years, 25 years. What do you think? This is total speculation. It scares the hell out of me, to tell you the truth. What do you think is going to happen once we have intelligent machines that have their own, I don't want to say the word consciousness because they're not alive, but have the intelligence that surpasses us? Will they decide that we're too, crazy like and just kill us off? Or will they be our little pets and animals like we treat, say, our dogs and cats, where we love them, we feed them, but they do what we want?
Right. So happy to talk about this as well. So when people talk about artificial intelligence becoming self-aware, it's typically viewed as the singularity, which is an astrophysical term that means an event horizon beyond which we have no ability to understand what would happen. So it was borrowed by Werner Vinge and popularized by my friend Ray Kurzweil to mean the point where artificial intelligence becomes self-aware and recursively self-improving. Now, Ray Kurzweil, in his upcoming book, The Singularity is Nearer, has accelerated his predicted year from 2045 to 2036. And for those people who know Ray Kurzweil, he is not, a fly by the seat of the pants type of guy. He's got meticulous evidence to support why he thinks 2035 is when computers will wake up. Now, I actually have a somewhat different take, because that type of singularity supposes that you've got, on one hand, human-like intelligence and consciousness, and then you've got machine-like capabilities. What that approach to singularity is saying is that somehow or other, machine-like capability will either emergently property create or, be given birth, however, something that akin to what we would call human consciousness. That's very difficult. I actually see it the other way around. I think it's a lot easier, and you mentioned Neuralink, Dr. J. Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier to add machine-like capabilities to existing consciousness. Because of those two, consciousness is far and away the harder thing to do. So if we already have that consciousness, all we need to do to achieve a singularity, which is super AI, you have 3 levels of AI. You have weak, strong, and super. Weak is every form of AI that we've ever created. It can play chess. It can optimize a ship's course, things like that. Strong AI is what we would associate as being equivalent to human. We're not there yet. Super AI is far beyond human capability. Now, machines and AI are accelerating exponentially. So if we can add increasingly powerful dynamic machine capabilities to our existing consciousness, that makes a singularity or self-aware machine code computers far more likely to happen soon. Now, how does that happen? Well, you have the Neuralink. You have a chip basically implanted in your skull that connects to the internet. Then you have nanotechnology pieces in your brain that optimize your neocortex to have a more efficient interface with this brain-computer interface. That begets a singularity. That begets artificial intelligence that's self-aware, because we are the self-awareness. One of the things that Ray Kurzweil has talked about is that he does.
Mr. Hynek, we lost you for a quick moment. Hold on, folks. Connecting to him again. It's almost as if he got cut off just as he was saying that. Mr. Hynek, you back? Hold on, folks. Let's fix this here. There's a poor network connection with him. Fortunately, not with you, folks. Hang tight here. Let me bring him right back, and we'll finish that question because we got plenty more to go. Let's see here, folks. Hang tight here. You probably are hearing the ringing like I am. Maybe his phone died. We lost you for a quick moment. The last word I believe you said was singularity.
Singularity. Did I talk about consciousness being added to computers?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so I think, basically in a nutshell, I think that instead of adding consciousness to computers, we add computers to humans who already have consciousness with the Neuralink and nanotechnology, etc. So artificial intelligence effectively becomes self-aware because we are the self-awareness as we merge with artificial intelligence.
Now, this is actually somewhat related to materials. This is something that's very interesting, and I love the way they worded it. What's your take on meta materials? They don't want to say, special materials or things that cannot be made in this galaxy or this planet. They talk about meta materials. What's your take on that? Because I know, when I was working with Art Bell 5 years ago, that years before that, Linda Moulton Howe received a package with weird metals that she ended up giving to Art for research and ended up being sold to the Stars Academy. We also know Lou Elizondo has talked about that. And I do know, is it Jacques Vallée? Maybe I'm blanking on the name, but somebody has, I believe, 26 or 27 different types of materials that have properties that cannot be found on this earth naturally and also cannot be made according to the science that we know. Now, is there a hidden science? I wouldn't doubt there is. Of course, I would think there is. But what's your take on the fact that they've talked about metamaterials?
Well, yes. It's a fascinating topic to me. And Lou is on record as saying that they will soon release, lab results of a metamaterial that will sort of blow the door open. I hope so, but I'm not sure that it would necessarily, because now, and like you talked about disclosures more like a process, which I believe in. disclosure is a much more difficult thing. I mean, if back in the day Walter Cronkite had hosted a news conference with video of an alien, we all would have believed it. Now, if there was a spaceship that's caught on film live landing on the lawn of the White House, what percentage of people simply would not believe it, no matter what you say?
Most.
Disclosure is a much
Yeah.
more difficult thing now. And so for me, if someone discloses lab results of a shape-shifting alloy, I don't know if it's going to move the needle that much. I think people that believe it already or accept it would say, "Yep, there you go," and the people who don't will say, "I don't believe it. Nope, nope. It's just not real."
I'm
So
definitely with you on that. People who don't believe and have their mindset will never believe. Yet those who do believe and are open-minded will definitely take it in. But we are in a generation where the older generation has passed away that really didn't believe that we were, anything but alone. For instance, growing up in school, both you and I were both taught in elementary and high school, and even further for you, that there are no planets outside our solar system. Yet what do we know now? I believe there is a Goldilocks planet found almost every day. I think there's 4,000. And I think the current estimate is there are 1.8 exoplanets for every star. Now, if we have 400 billion stars? What would that be? 1.8 times 400 billion. That is a massive number of planets. And that's why I think the paradigm has changed, where we have a whole new generation where people are believing. But you're absolutely right. The people who will not believe will never believe it, and those who do will.
yeah, and you sort of talked about basically the Drake equation. I think the universe is teeming. Personally, I think the universe is teeming with life. Then you have the Fermi paradox as to why wouldn't we know? Well, I think the answer is because the universe is so vast that it doesn't really matter how many civilizations there are. It's just too big. Then you also have what I think is fascinating, the Transcension Hypothesis, which goes along the lines of, okay, if you are a civilization that has achieved that singularity that we've talked about, you can manipulate anything. And you've got no need to go jawing halfway across the known universe. You can actually go inside into inner space and find everything that you need, everything that would intrigue you right there in your own backyard, so to speak.
Here is a question that I've wanted to ask you from the beginning, so I'm going to bypass everyone's questions. Don't worry, I'm going to come back to yours. The Skinwalker Ranch. What's your personal opinion on that? Because I have, heard from the people there. I've heard from George Knapp, from Jeremy Corbell. I would love to speak to Brendan Frugal, the current owner, or maybe I know this past a couple weeks ago, or this past weekend, or just recently. I think it might be happening, just finishing today. The UFO Congress. One of the security guards at Skinwalker Ranch is speaking there, or did speak. Have you ever had a chance to cross paths with one of the people, and what's your take on the Skinwalker Ranch?
I've not. I find it fascinating. I watched Jeremy's movie about it, but I've never met. I don't know the current owner. I've never been there, so I don't know enough to say really a whole lot about it.
From what I know, at least from hearing the stories, if they are all true, it is a very scary place. You have physical craft, you got these orbs that seem to strike the nerve center of your brain, you got these disemboweled voices that are speaking in languages that you don't understand, that are speaking in your head when you could be standing next to someone who's also hearing them, yet they're not physical. It's just really bizarre. And I think at the end of Jeremy Corbell's movie, if I'm not mistaken, when they were asked, what do you think this is? I think the answer was all of the above. And I think that's the best explanation. All of the above seems to be it.
Yeah, because it's so multifaceted.
Okay, let me see here what else. Corey Blake, is the transpatent aluminum ET technology, or did we create it on our own?
Is the what technology?
The transpatent aluminum.
No idea.
I'm
No
assuming
idea.
that's the technology that To the Stars Academy has, or that tiny piece that was. I can't even describe how it is shown, but it has these layers of aluminum that are in concentrations that are not found naturally here on Earth, and also can't be made on Earth. But again, it's something fascinating. But if you don't know, if you want to bypass that question, no problem. We'll go to the next one here. Let me see here. Um, Let me read this one first. Okay. If the aliens are dimensional beings, does he think they may be trying to make sure we humans don't figure out a way to enter their dimension?
What a fun question. My feeling, and this is based on my personal, let's say, perceived experience, because I don't know if it's real, but also just how I feel about these things, is that it's like there was a crazy guy that used to call my house when I was a kid. His name was Prince Michael. He said he was from Orion, and I kept saying, "You're probably from the Pleiades." And we went on, and there's a lot of funny stuff about him. But basically, one day he told me to call the CIA, and he said the CIA will tell you they're afraid of me. So I called the CIA. I'm like an 11-year-old kid, and the long and short of it was, I asked the CIA, "Are you afraid of this guy?" And the receptionist at the CIA said, "Paul, let's put it this way: we're not losing sleep over him." I don't think that if there's an interdimensional species or species that come here or know about us, I don't think they have anything to fear from us whatsoever. I think they would be in such a superior position to us technologically. And back to the other question about high consciousness, I think they would have that and hopefully be much farther morally evolved than us as well. So no, I don't think they are worried about us in any way, shape, or form.
Here is a question from Lasha that I'm going to ask you, of course, but I can also have an opinion on it. But of course, you're the guest and you probably know more about it. Why
Yeah.
does he think the design of UFO ships keeps changing, like saucer and then triangles, etc.?
So that's fascinating. That's something that Jacques Vallée has talked about a lot. That and that goes back to what we're talking about, like the Bible. People seem to interpret or view UFOs through the lens of current technology. You had the airship sightings in the 1890s, right? That are sort of like these big old steampunk flying things. You've got saucers when you had, these sort of pulp science fiction magazines with saucers and ray guns and aliens. We've now got wedges and things that are more like stealth technology. So, and that could be a variety of reasons. One, maybe there are no extraterrestrials and we see mysterious things and we just interpret them based on our technological, standards of the day. Or it could be something like, like Jacques Vallée has talked about, could this be manifestations of our collective unconscious? So it's clear that reports of UFO visual characteristics change over time. And is that because, it's hard to think that UFOs would actually change over time. I'm inclined to believe that when we see something so fantastic and traumatic, we filter it with our biases and our understanding to make it something more understandable. So, or it could also be that aliens, interdimensional or extraterrestrial, are manifesting things in ways that we can better understand, or that the manifestations, you might see something entirely different than I see. So there's a lot of explanations for that, but it is certainly true that the broad body of reports tend to change over time and be in unison with the developing technological capabilities of society.
That also reminds me of, for instance, Alexander the Great talked about flying shields, and you're absolutely right. It's our own perceptions. At the same time, why I think people see balls or spheres or triangles or boomerangs or spaceship or flying saucers like actual discs is possibly the same reason we have different cars. You have SUVs, you got sports cars, you got limos, you got this and that, and also the fact is that we have, what if there are multiple species, and even though they may be using similar propulsion systems such as zero-point propulsion, non-reactionary, that these are just different models they have.
Yeah. And I think there's something to the idea that it it's almost like the Heisenberg uncertainty that, or quantum, is it there or is it not? And it may be a function. It may not be a one size fits all appearance, but there may be something about the relationship and the interaction between individuals and that object that make it different to different people, which is one of the more sort of fascinating possibilities for me.
This is going back to Corey Blake's question about the aluminum. Let me read it again. He meant to say transparent aluminum, not transpatent, transparent aluminum. Let me find the full question for you. I'm going to reread it to you, which was, you know what I'll do, Corey, if you could just copy and repaste it with the proper language, I will re-ask it unless you believe it was asked in full, because I can't go back that far. Okay, with that being said, I know you've heard of Dr. Roger Leir. Did you ever have a chance to work with him?
No, I did not.
What's your take on his implants? Because fortunately, I was good friends with him. I was present at his 17th and final surgery, and these things seem to be very anomalous. First of all, they, depending on which scientist you take them to, they seem to be sending signals that are consistent with being received in deep space. They have compositions that are also not, that can't be made here on Earth with conventional technologies and different things like that. And another thing too, they seem to be using the human body as a battery. It's almost as the moment they are removed from a human body that they shut down. And if you've seen Jeremy Corbell's films, Patient 17, I believe, was his first, which actually was right after the ones me and the Cousins brothers from Third Phase of Moon did. We did Alien Human Project Part 1 and 2, which was basically, interviewing Dr. Roger Leir, showing the implants, showing his scientists, etc., etc. That, to me, at the time, was some of the most compelling cases, aside from abductions like Travis Walton, who actually passed several polygraphs, had witnesses who passed polygraphs, and just had weird anomalies that people couldn't explain.
I kind of lost track of the question. That was just fascinating to listen to.
Oh, no, I was asking you about the technologies, about Roger Leir's technologies.
Yeah, the implants, right?
The implants, exactly. And also about abductions, too. About, are they... What's your take on the actual implants? Do you think that they're being used... Okay, I'll rephrase it in a different way. How about this? Yeah.
Okay.
All right. The implants themselves, since they seem to be from having qualities that are not consistent with us unless we are using some sort of secret technology to build them, they are feeding off of us. They seem to be using the human body as a battery, because the moment they're removed, they're shut off. So what's your take on that? Did you ever look into that, even though he passed away, I believe it was 6 years ago at this point. Yeah, 2014. Or when did you actually get involved in being proactive and speaking at the UFO lectures and intermingling with the people involved?
Yeah, I don't know much about implants. I find it fascinating. I've never seen one. I'd like to see one. I'd like to do some laboratory analysis on them. But I can't really speak more to them than that. Um, I became involved publicly in the UFO phenomena really just a few years ago with the start of the Project Bluebook show, and started speaking at Alien Con and MUFON Symposium and UFO Congress and all manner of other conferences. And now I'm letting it be known that I will speak anywhere in the world in any language with 2-month notice about UFOs.
Well, you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if I see you in Greece sometime. When you get booked in Greece, I'll be out there with you, so I can speak my
I'll be
native
in
language with you.
Bulgaria. I'll be in Bulgaria, not far from Greece, next
That,
September.
that's right. That is very close. Next September and a year from now.
Yep.
Nice, nice. Now, back to the Travis Walton case, as I was talking about abductions. To me, that seems to be one of the most spectacular cases because
Yeah.
not only do you have him who had seven, I believe it was seven polygraphs that he passed, and the five witnesses, I believe 4 out of the 5 passed their polygraphs. The one that didn't, I believe, had a criminal record, which is why his polygraph didn't pass. Yeah, but essentially, he was gone for 5 days. They actually thought the guy was murdered by his own crew. Yeah, Philip Klass, I'm sure you heard the saying, Philip Klass can kiss my ass. Travis Walton still says that to this day. What do you think of that case and abductions in general? Because obviously, as you mentioned earlier, there is a large group of people who want that 15 minutes of fame. I don't think everybody who says they've been abducted were abducted, but there is a huge number of people that undoubtedly seem to have something that's happened to them that has caused severe trauma to this day. And as each day, month, year goes by, that it seems to unlock more of their memories. It's almost as if the ETs are telling them, hey, you're going to remember this down the line, but you're not going to remember this now. So the question being, what are some of the most famous abduction cases that you believe were authentic? You mentioned the Pascagoula case. I believe that's one of the best cases. Betty and Barney Hill is another one. And, of course, the Walton case. So if you were to list a couple more, what would you think are the best?
Well, I love all three of those, and for different reasons. Barney and Betty Hill, and I think most people know that Betty Hill is the aunt of Kathleen Martin.
That's right.
Barney and Betty Hill is a fascinating case because that was an interracial couple. It was a black man and a white woman in the 60s. And just think of the hesitation they must have had to attract any kind of attention whatsoever to themselves, much less something as kooky as UFOs.
Yes.
I mean, they were clearly not, given the interracial nature of the couple in the 60s, that's very, very dangerous. And so you certainly don't see, well, they're going to milk this for money. That just does not jibe at all. So not only were they not out to make money, but they knew that they faced very real danger. And yet they were compelled to make their case public anyways. I just find that just amazing.
Especially in that era, like you said, interracial couple, which already a lot of people, didn't like that fact, which is pretty sad. You want to love someone, you love someone. And of course, they did love each other. And then to talk about this very traumatic experience, which sadly was leaked by Benjamin Simon, someone they put their trust into. But again, they too never changed their story. And that's one of the cases that stood the test of time.
Yeah, and you mentioned Travis Walton and Pascagoula. Those are both great cases. Travis has, like you said, gone through that many lie detector tests. I've known him since I was a kid, and he just oozes credibility and honesty. And Pascagoula and Calvin Parker, more and more people keep coming forward to verify Calvin's account. That's a case that's getting stronger over time.
One of the best parts of Calvin's case was when I believe it was the sheriff's department, not police, when they left them in the room alone with the recorder on, with the microphone on, and they were talking between each other, thinking they were going to talk
Yeah,
about hoaxing each other. No. If anyone out there heard the recording, these guys went through something that was so traumatic. They were talking about having a drink just to calm their nerves when they get home. That to me
yeah, and and
reeks
you
of
you could
something.
you right, you could say, okay, they knew the recorder was on, or they're in cahoots with the sheriff. It just doesn't seem like that's the case, and just the overall behavior that they've shown ever since, in the case of Calvin, who's luckily still around, it's always been consistent. And one of the aspects of that case that Calvin told me in an interview we were doing together was that it happened, in October 1973. They were at the police department until, Calvin said, like 10 o'clock p.m. on that Sunday night. And the next morning, and they both went to work at the shipyard the next day, which is amazing. But Calvin said that the next morning, my father was in the HR office of their shipyard at 7 a.m.
Whoa.
And Calvin said he never understood how he could have gotten there so fast. Now, this is 1973, so it's after the official, dissolution of Project Bluebook. Although my father did continue on in a consulting capacity of some kind with Project Bluebook or with the Air Force. But how he could have gotten there, if he had been in Chicago, he would have had to fly overnight immediately. I think, and I don't know, but I think he must have been on the Gulf Coast already for some other reason and happened to get wind of it that very night and able to show up at 7 o'clock the next morning.
Very well said. And obviously, your father seemed very, very interested because, again, that's another case that stood the test of time, like the other ones we mentioned. With that being said, Paul, I seem to have been caught up with the questions in the chat, and I have plenty more for you, but I've used up my almost 2 hours with you, and I will use them again in the future. I want to thank you for this, and I want to also invite you back again. Please hang on for a quick moment afterwards, but I do want to give you a few moments to tell the audience where they can find you. If there's anything, any topics or anything that you didn't say that you want to mention, please mention it right now, as well as I know you said you're speaking in Bulgaria next September or any upcoming conferences, and that would be a perfect time.
Okay, cool. Well, I've enjoyed it very much, Dr. Jake, and I'd love to come back. Where to find me? I have such an anemic social media footprint. I'm on Twitter, Paul Hynek. It's my account name on Twitter. People can also email me, paulhynek@gmail.com. I had a lot of conferences and things teed up. I was supposed to speak in Italian next month in Rome, and that got canceled. Next year, there's a bunch of different conferences. But no, I think I don't know if there's anything else really burning that I wanted to say. I think you were great in touching upon all manner of aspects of this Gordian knot of a phenomenon.
Oh, thank you so much. Let me just say a couple of things. Everybody out there, the website's been down because it's being switched over to a new site. I've been promising you all a new site. It looks very beautiful. Unfortunately, you haven't been able to see it because it's being hosted on a private server until the old archives get loaded. In the meantime, you can all experience the 700 plus shows over the last almost 8 years for free on YouTube. So please check them out. There are tons of shows and amazing guests that you all like. I have a poll running. I'm going to post it on Instagram. And the reason I'm announcing it here is right now we've got a good enough audience. And I want you guys to rank your favorite shows. I mean, these include guests. I'll give you a few of the names here, even though some passed away, such as Edgar Mitchell. We also have Story Musgrave, Roger Stone, Jerome Corsi, actor Jack Osborne, Sean Stone, Governor Michael Dukakis, Governor Jesse Ventura. There's just so many. Michio Kaku, folks. I all want you to tell me who you like and to rank them. And of course, Paul Hynek. Rank them all, and that way we can include them in the top 25, top 50 list that I want to put at the top of this site, and also to rearrange it for the archives. That way it's easier for you to listen. Also, I want to give some shout outs. I want to give my shout out to Pam Rettenberg, who is my social media manager, my assistant, my video editor, and so much more. I want to thank the 2 super chats, of course, from Rockstar and Pyramid 7. Thank you so much for being there. For everybody out there that's in the chat room, I want to thank you for sticking around, considering it's been a little while for my hiatus, and hopefully there won't be that many more medical hiatuses, but knock on wood, let's just see where the world takes us, because I am a fighter and I will not stop until I stop breathing. And let me also give a couple more shout outs too. I do want to thank my good friends in Hawaii, Blake and Brent Cousins of Third Phase of Moon, the world's largest UFO YouTube channel. I know you all know in this chat who they are. About 800,000 subscribers. Almost every single day they release a video. Also, I noticed Doc Skinner's in here, as well as Rich from GoofOn, and so many other people that I wish I had time to list every single name. With that being said, friends, I want to thank you all, and just keep posted. Stick around and pay attention to social media, and you will find out when the next show is. We got so much up. I have so much up my sleeve that I don't want to say it, because every time I say something, I get cursed. For instance, I'll give you an example. I mentioned when David Icke would be on, got canceled, and then I had to wait till he was free, and then I didn't tell you when he was coming on, and then I did it. Uri Geller, same thing. That's why I don't like to tell you who's going to be on next until that time, until I get confirmation. So, with that being said, friends, this is Paul Hynek with Dr. J, straight from the city of God knows what these days, and we are officially